I'm a second-generation firefighter. My father spent the latter days of his career as a fire safety director at a massive mental asylum, the Essex County Hospital Center, in Cedar Grove, New Jersey, in the early 2000s. My father's a Vietnam War veteran, having served with the USAF Crash Rescue and had 35 years in professional firefighting after his military service. In my youth, he was a beast of a man and not afraid of anything, one of the reasons why I became a firefighter like him. Our state version of Occupational Safety and Health Administration has to come and do inspections at all facilities. His was no exception, so the inspectors made their way to an abandoned part of the facility that used to house the criminally insane, the absolute worst of the worst, serial killers, rapists, cannibals, etc. My father left them with the keys and a flashlight because the electricity didn't work. The inspectors were radioing back to my father that they kept hearing talking and footsteps, which was impossible. Not even squatters could move around because each section is isolated with locked doors to prevent escape. Eventually, the inspectors give up and actually flee without finishing. My dad decides to stick around and check the alarm boxes they didn't. As he's checking one of the alarms, he feels as if something is watching him from down the hall. As he looks, a shadow forms with a head, shoulders, torso, but no legs, and just two holes where the eyes should be. My dad noped the hell out of there. That night when he came home from work and told me the story, I never saw him so scared. He was as pale as death, and the hairs on his arms were standing straight up the entire time he told me what happened. It shook him to the core, and became a legend around his job after he relayed what happened to security. They shut down the hospital because it was too expensive to maintain and remediate all the problems like mold, asbestos, leaking pipes, etc. Since it was shut down, it has been on Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters and a myriad of other shows and movies. My dad has been in some of them. Jason from Ghost Hunters called it the scariest place he's ever investigated. About 3 years ago, they finally tore the entire thing down and built condos and a park. My dad wasn't the only one with ghost stories there, but he certainly was the more famous one, because his co-workers thought that he wouldn't be scared of anything. My friend's father was a doctor. Back in the day, he was doing his residency, I think in a hospital in Memphis. A DOA comes in, with a hole in his chest the size of a coffee can, according to my friend's dad. When he asked what happened to the guy, the police played a dispatch recording for him. Apparently, the dead guy was a suspected serial rapist and had broken into an elderly woman's house. She caught him breaking in and grabbed her shotgun. She got him under control and with the gun pointed at this guy, called the police. They were keeping her on the line until the police arrived, and in the recording you could hear her occasionally yell at the guy and tell him not to move. Then, all of a sudden, everything goes quiet for a second, and the dispatcher asks the woman what happened. Her response, "I told him not to move." I was first on scene to a garage fire. As I approached, I noticed what looked like a low-lying shrub on fire in a house a few houses down. I proceeded to observe the garage fully engulfed in flames. The house was dangerously close to the garage, so I began knocking on the doors to see if anyone was in the house. When we went to the side door, it was open. After knocking and announcing my presence, I opened the door and immediately smelled gasoline. I decided to clear the house and began going room by room. Upon opening an upstairs bedroom door, all I see is red, Lines of blood everywhere, on the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It turns out the husband had taken a circular saw to his wife, who was lying on the bed. To my horror, she was still alive but gravely injured. Remember the shrub that I saw when I was approaching the house? It turns out that was the husband. He ended up being quite a crispy critter. They both passed and we had no remaining witnesses. It seemed like the husband cut the wife up and then intended to burn the house to cover it up. He doused the house in gasoline and then returned to the garage, perhaps for more gas, and somehow lit himself and the garage on fire. He must have started running when he caught a flame, but he only made it a couple of houses down before collapsing. I'm a firefighter in a small casino town in Nevada. We got a call for a fire on a third floor of a casino hotel. This casino failed inspections every year. Someone had checked in under a false name, dumped a can of gasoline on the bed, and started a fire. Luckily, the sprinkler system took care of most of it. A good portion of the third floor hallway was flooded, but none of the safety doors closed. No audible alarms went off, and the lights only went off in the room where the fire started. None of the people staying in the rooms on either side had any idea what had happened. One was quite surprised to find us in full gear when he left his room to go gamble. There were no personal effects in the room. We never found out why this guy torched the bed, and to my knowledge, he was never identified or located after the incident. In my couple years of dispatching, I've been there for quite a few that have stuck with me. You can't just shrug them off. One was on a pretty average afternoon, until I took a call from a person who begins the conversation, "Her arm is gone. Oh my God," and proceeds to tell me that he overheard screams in his neighbor's yard and went to investigate, finding two distraught parents holding their couple-year-old child who was just run over by a ride-on lawnmower. As I get my units en route, I return to my caller and proceed to do some damage control and learn that 2 limbs were dismembered. The child ended up surviving and has prosthetics to assist in her life. The second call that really stuck with me was a call that started off as a female calling for an ambulance with her cell phone, saying that a male friend she was with cut himself while cooking. The address she gave my partner was out in the middle of nowhere in a hard-to-get-to part of the county that's about 15 to 20 minutes away. About 10 minutes after her original call, the female calls 911 back and I answer. She's in a panic, telling me he's chasing her with the knife and that he stabbed himself in the chest. The line goes dead. Almost immediately after that, the ambulance says they're on scene, but no answer at the residence. They were updated on the issue and advised to stage in their unit. I finally reconnect with the caller on a normal phone line and try to figure out where she is. She tells me she ran outside to hide. I ask her if there's a mailbox. No luck. How about the car license plate? She gives it to me, but it comes back to the house address she gave. But I have a full name for the mail. Using that name, I'm able to check our computers and find an address in the same area, but across the river and about 10 minutes from town. I update the PD and EMS, and they head that way. I instruct my caller to call 911 with her cell again to try and trace her call to make sure we have the right location. Now, I'm focused back on the male, who she said is face down and a knife to his side. I ask her to move the knife away and try rolling him over. She sets the phone down on speaker, and the most shrill scream of horror can be heard, followed by "Why? Why?" She returns to the phone now in hysterics and tells me that he cut open his throat. I give her some instructions to help stop bleeding, right as PD and EMS arrives. He's pronounced DOA at the hospital, and I was told he had 30-some stab wounds. After detectives interviewed her and checked with the coroner's staff, they concluded that it was self-inflicted and a suicide. For a good amount of time, I had a feeling it was a domestic disturbance and the female killed him. The worst is anything involving children. Then, right up next to it, is anyone finding someone dead. There was a house fire that had broken out at like 3 a.m. I took a call from the mother, who was frantically trying to get back in the front door. Her 2 children, about 7 and 11 years old, were trapped upstairs. The fire was heavy in the hall and stairs to the 2nd floor, and it was being fueled by Grandma's oxygen tank. Grandpa was busy trying to break into the window on the 2nd floor from the roof. My PD got on scene within a minute and tried making entry, but got choked back by the smoke. The fire department was a moment behind them and was able to locate the 2 children. They were so critical that one of the police officers jumped in and drove the ambulance to the nearest hospital. The children were flown to a metro hospital where one of them passed away. It sucks because you're so helpless on the phone. We were able to calm the mum down enough to get which rooms they were in, which is probably why one survived. Next is death. Hardest when it's someone who finds out their loved one has taken their own life. I took a call from a woman whose husband shot himself in the chest while she was getting ready for bed. They were older, and she couldn't roll him over to assist in attempting to stop the bleeding, but I'm sure he passed instantly. Then you have death involving normal people going about their business and come across wrecks. Most of the time, the worst accidents only get 1 or 2 calls, and no one ever stops. When they do stop, it's traumatic as hell for them. There's nothing you can do or say to a man who was driving his semi when a car flew out from a country road and pinned itself underneath the trailer when help is 20 minutes away. Nor is there anything you can do or say to someone who came across a car on fire with the driver trapped and unconscious, but burning to death because he's pinned in. There's nothing you can say to the young woman who just saw a head-on accident with a box truck, and now an elderly couple is partially ejected and mortally wounded. I'm an ex-firefighter, and we were primarily tasked with rescue, mostly at MVAs or other instances where multiple people and property were involved. I once made scene to an MVA involving 2 vehicles hitting almost head-on down a 45-mile-an-hour mountain road. An old square-body Ford, once occupied, and a more modern Chevy sedan, twice occupied. The call came out as a possible entrapment, with one over the embankment. Apparently, the driver of the truck dropped his phone and bent over to get it. Doing so, he drifted exactly 1 lane to his left. This is the USA, and there was a single lane in each direction, so he is squarely in oncoming traffic. As soon as he looked up, he realized his mistake and jerked the wheel to the right. In the meantime, the Chevy coming up the mountain saw a truck speeding at them and jerked into their oncoming lane to avoid him. The timing was sadly perfect, as when the 2 each made their maneuvers, they hit squarely passenger side front to passenger side front. The truck went over the side and the driver was thrown. He was beat up and his truck literally separated from its bed, but he was ultimately what we would call minor. The Chevy driver was fine. Airbag went off in his face. He got some whiplash, but he was perfectly coherent and unhurt. We realized right away we knew him. He was a captain of the fire department in the next town. The possible entrapment was his adult daughter in the passenger seat, the only one to directly be impacted by the crash. The A-pillar on the car snapped at the roofline. When it did this, it bent inwards and impaled her skull, like right through her forehead. But amazingly, she was alive, like in mild discomfort, but almost completely coherent. Her door was also crushed to the point of being inoperable. So, we have foreign body protocols in place, and we have vehicular extraction protocols. But the immediate problem is, the vehicle is a foreign body in her. We have to cut her out of the car, but also policy was not to remove foreign bodies, so we have to avoid cutting the car in such a way that would press the A-pillar further into her skull, or yank it out. To make a long story shorter, we cut the remaining roof pillars and posted a firefighter at each cut pillar. When they were all cut, we heaved together and threw the roof off of the side of the mountain, away from the car. The lady got scared when we heaved. She jerked back and came right off the pillar that impaled her. By that time, MedFlight was there to take her. She made a full recovery in 2 months. I used to work for the relay service and had a 911 call come in. A deaf person that could speak was trying to get help after a person broke into her house. After getting the police dispatcher on the line, we realized that we had a problem with our ability to communicate. The old woman had an older TTY device that required putting the phone's headset onto it in order for the TTY tones I would send to get picked up and translated into the text for her to read. In a normal conversation, she would talk until she wanted a response and indicate that by saying "go ahead," and then place the phone down on the TTY and read the text the tones produce. Likely in her panic, she wasn't placing the phone down, so nothing I typed to her was being relayed. The dispatcher was getting tense with me, and I was typing the same sentence over and over as fast as I could for her to keep quiet and put the phone down. We both tried desperately to advise her to stay quiet, because she was panicking loudly on the phone, and we were worried she would draw attention to herself. Sadly, she did and was shot. We couldn't get her to answer a single question about where she lived, a description of the man. We couldn't advise her to safety, nothing. I had to stay on the phone with the police dispatcher and literally type "Are you okay, Q?" over and over for about 10 minutes until we could hear sirens outside of the house. They found her house based on the information that she was using a landline, and I provided them with her phone number. Eventually, she was found, which is when I was no longer needed and told to disconnect. I'll never find out if she survived, or if she bled out while I was on the phone with her. To this day, it still bothers me. We get a call for a structure fire. The house is an older trailer, but one that someone has taken a great deal of care maintaining. A very large, brand new deck that was partially enclosed, vinyl siding over the metal skin of the trailer, and a number of new windows, landscaping, etc. I doubt the effort outweighed the cost, but there was substantial elbow grease put in to make it nice. On the porch was a set of back seats from a minivan that were up against the house, possibly being used as deck furniture or just stored there. These were the points of ignition and were soaked with some form of petroleum accelerant. Unfortunately, auto seat foam is flame retardant in newer vehicles, and once the liquid fuel burnt up, the fire went out, just damaging the seat, the vinyl siding, and broke the glass, and smoke damage to the living room. On the kitchen counter laid foreclosure paperwork for the property. Shortly thereafter, The homeowner walks out of the tree line, smells like gasoline, dressed in camouflage with camo face paint, claimed to have been hunting, but with no gun and nothing in season. He left with the fire marshal and the police. I was a 911 dispatcher for about 5 years out of school, and this was around 1993. One night I got a call from a lady at a residence in town. 911, what's your emergency?
Is this the police?
She breathed. She was freaking out, heavy breathing, scared, shaking voice. I've taken many calls like this, and from the sound of her voice, it was not going to be a routine call. I sat up straight, and my heart started to pump faster. Yes, ma'am, what's your emergency?
There's someone in my house.
She trailed off, very breathy and genuine, but not loud and freaking out. Okay, are you located at such and such address?
Yes.
I dispatched the cars to start heading over to the address, and I don't give a reason yet. Okay, do you know who the person is?
Well, no, I don't. I think I don't know, this sounds so crazy. I think that there's a ghost in my house.
She begins to sob and sounds so scared.
There's noises and I know there's a ghost, right in the other room. I can hear it right now.
At this time, the sergeant asks me for the reason for the call, and why I sent him and 2 other cars without explanation. Normally you'd send 1 car to something like that. It's suspicious activity, I told him.
What activity?
He demanded over the radio. A fair question. Sir, the caller is claiming that there is someone in the house, and she believes it to be a ghost. Silence on the air for about a minute.
10-4,
is all he said. By the time they got there, the ghost was gone, and the poor lady, a freaked out mess. And she kept apologizing for calling us. But it was real, she kept repeating. The officers later told me that her sincerity actually freaked them out a lot, and when they searched the house, guns drawn, even they were scared. I was 19 when this happened in 1985, and from the age of 6, I grew up in a small town with a population of 6,200. There was an abandoned girls' school that was always kind of creepy. It was on the corner of 2 of the main streets in my hometown. The owner was a career firefighter with the same agency. He wanted to convert it to an apartment building for about 20 families, but the town zoning commission said NFW because that would drop the neighboring property values, and they wanted single-family homes only. It looked abandoned, although the property owner kept up the lawn and yard. Teenagers had tried to use the building for a makeout or party place, but the village cops were onto it all the time, so it was never really used. My parents told me that there had been a murder there and other such stories. I later learned that they told me that BS story to keep me from wanting to play inside. My older sister told me once that it wasn't just a girls' school, it was an asylum for insane girls. She also told me, at another time, that it was actually a school for girls that got in trouble. I asked if she meant like a youth home or juvenile justice facility. No, for girls that got pregnant out of wedlock and their parents would send them away. I was a brand new firefighter on that night. I had passed my tool test, whereby an officer would name a tool, like a halogen tool, and you had to know exactly where on one of our 3 rigs, attack engine, supply engine, and a tower ladder, that tool was. So I was allowed to respond to the alarm. The alarm came in at 12:05, and I was on scene by 12:07. I was a volunteer, and in the department, volleys responded from home and in their personally owned vehicles to the site of the call. Career firefighters who lived in quarters would drive our rigs to the call. It was the first real run I'd ever been on. I actually beat the engines there. When they arrived, the captain handed me a hydrant wrench and said when the engineer made the wind-up hand signal, I was to turn the hydrant on, and then remain there until told to do otherwise. About 5 minutes later, the front wall of the building came down. I got a flashburn on my face because, back then, Nomex hoods were not standard equipment. We called the 3 of the neighbouring towns over, plus, the FDNY even showed up. We had 5 separate tower ladders in operation, all dumping water on this thing for 8 straight hours, just trying to contain it. Finally, they let us go home around 8 AM. Our small police department had little to no experience with arson investigations, so they got the county police to send their arson investigators. NY is weird about that. The sheriff only runs the jail and the courts. The Westchester County PD helped smaller departments with investigations and other specialized services like bomb squad, SWAT, marine aviation, etc. They could easily prove it was an arson fire. They just had no suspects, at least none that they could arrest and prosecute. But it was the worst kept secret and biggest rumor that the guy who owned it had torched it so he could build those multi-family apartments he wanted. But this never happened. I think when he died in retirement, the land was deeded back to the village, and they just decided to let it remain an empty field. This one was almost a career ender for me, and it would have been a short career as it was one of my first calls I ever took. So for background, the call taker sitting 2 seats down from me is taking a missing persons call. It's the mother calling it in. She can't find her daughter, and it's about 1 AM. So she's got no idea where her daughter might be. She was supposed to be home at 9. My friend 2 seats down takes all the info and sends an officer out. About 2 hours later, at 3 AM, I get a 911 open line, which ends up being a hang-up call. Now, we're required to call these numbers back, as long as an actual number comes up on our screen. The number is triangulated somewhere in the middle of a wooded area, and I'm getting no voice, so I call back again. On the 3rd callback, finally a girl answers and gives her name, the same name of the girl who's missing. I recognize the name, and since I wasn't the original call taker, I assumed I should get the person who talked with the mother, so I put this girl on hold. Biggest mistake of my call-taking life. I come to find out that the girl had been dragged into the woods and raped by some lunatic, and was running around the woods trying to get to safety. That's when she called us, and I put her on hold for 1 minute and 5 seconds. I can't imagine what I put this poor girl through, but she stayed on the line, and we got help to her. We triangulated her spot within 2 miles, and found her with a bloodhound. I can't even begin to imagine if she had hung up that phone. And I never asked anyone to hold on again after that. I always got help to them first. Thank God this girl didn't die because of me. And that is my most disturbing call, all because I screwed up, big time. I responded to a house filled with smoke. We arrived and found a large irregular burn pattern on the carpet in the living room, with an odd small pile of stuff in the middle of it. The owners were outside crying. Cops were there. There was lots going on. The house was filled with thick but lingering smoke. No detectors going off. We made a quick check and found no fire, so we evacuated the smoke. We figured all the batteries were dead, and it was a very close call. That's what my report said. I come to find out that this 14-year-old girl who lived there had attempted to murder her family. She had gotten up in the middle of the night and taken the batteries out of all the smoke detectors, and then poured lighter fluid on the floor in the living room and lit it up. She put a few personal items on the floor to help the fire go and then left, locking the front door behind her. She waited outside, and after half an hour when nothing was happening, she found herself locked out. She went over to the neighbors and asked for the spare key her family left with them for emergencies. The neighbor walked her back to her house, presumably to tell the girl's parents that she had been out at all hours. And when he unlocked the door, a bunch of smoke rolled out from the smoldering carpet. Neighbors called 911 and the girl was freaked out. She said it was a mistake and that she didn't mean it. The neighbor is standing there with a what the hell look on his face. The cops heard the call for fire and jumped on it to help. When they arrived, this girl was losing it in the front yard. The neighbor relays what he heard to the cops. The girl's parents were now up and trying to figure out what was going on. Apparently, the girl told the cops she knocked over a lamp or something innocent, and then went for a walk. But when they looked inside the front door and saw the makings of a crime scene, coupled with her ever-changing and inconsistent story, they put some cuffs on her. Her mum is pissed, and the girl says that she wishes she would have killed them. While I wasn't there for that moment, I imagine she shook her fist and said, "And I would have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for those meddling neighbors." I had recently certified as an operator, and a friend of mine who was taking a call, when I see him stand up and yell across the room to our radio folks, I think somebody just got shot." Apparently, he got a call from a female who was nonchalantly going on about how her husband was threatening to shoot her in the knees again, and how she needed the police to come out to the house. She wasn't distressed, and after listening to the tape, she sounded like this was a common occurrence in their household. At about the 2-minute mark in the call, you heard a very loud noise in the background, followed by hysterical screaming, and the line disconnecting. Because of what she had said in the call, and the way it ended, he pretty much assumed that the wife had been shot. After he yells across the room to update radio, he calls the number back. That's when the 6-year-old answers the phone, with a very loud sobbing going on in the background. She proceeds to say that her dad just shot himself, and starts asking my friend why he did that and if it was her fault. Once my buddy understands that the guy shot himself, he convinces the little girl to get her mum and head out of the front door and go over to a neighbor until we arrive on scene. This one always stuck with me because of the age of that little girl and seeing that take place. Recently, I took a call where a neighbor called to say someone had just kicked in a door and was armed with a gun. Moments later, I heard a gunshot. As we're responding to the scene, we get a call from a teenage girl who is sobbing and telling us that her dad just burst into their apartment and shot her mother and her mother's boyfriend in the head, killing them right in front of her. Then he laid the gun on the table, kissed her on the head, and apologized to her, and was sitting on the couch waiting for the police to arrive. The fire department I worked for had this guy, Chuck, that had been with the department for only about 6 months or so, but had developed a reputation for being overly excited about responding to a fire call. Chuck would also constantly complain if they had not had a call recently. About a month later, my instructor, Terry, gets a call very early in the morning, and it's from Chuck, and he asks if there has been a call about a fire yet this morning. Terry replied no and went back to bed. Less than 5 minutes later, Terry gets an alert about a house fire and before he can even get a chance to answer the radio call, he hears Chuck tell dispatch that he is already on scene. Once the fire was out, Terry pulled Chuck aside to ask him about the fire, and Chuck said that he was driving around and saw smoke. Well, something didn't sit right with Terry, and he alerted the arson investigator. A week later, same thing happens, except it was a business that was on fire. Chuck called Terry, asked if there was a report of a fire. Terry said no, and as soon as he got off the phone, he got dressed and was heading out the door when he got the alert. And again, Chuck responded immediately that he was on scene. By the time the first engine arrived, Chuck already had the fire out. The one thing that Chuck overlooked, however, was that the business had security cameras. The cameras recorded Chuck setting a fire, driving away and circling around the block, pulling back into the lot and grabbing his equipment to extinguish the fire. I was a police dispatcher 1 year in college for campus police, Worcester Polytechnic Institute by the way. It was generally really boring. It was a small and nerdy school, not much happened. There was a sheet with codes on it. The codes represented certain kinds of calls. Though I don't remember the code's numbers nor what they represented. It might have been like code 3 is a fight in progress, code 19 would be like officer down, whatever. I took it upon myself to memorize the list. After a while, I had it down. Then I never needed to look at it again. I always worked third shift, so one night, an officer radioed in, code 42 at Main and Elm. Code 42? Don't remember that one. Plenty of codes, maybe half, were benign. They included common things like filling up your gas tank, or a noise complaint, etc. It wasn't always something horrible. So I wasn't too concerned as I casually looked for the sheet. How am I supposed to know what to do without it, you know? But I couldn't find it. Sometimes, if it's a big deal, and the other officers know they'll need help, they don't wait for me to dispatch them. Another officer will just say, "I'm coming," that sort of thing. So when someone did that, I became alarmed. Then another officer did it, and another. I was flipping out at this point. I had no idea what the problem was, so I couldn't do anything. What was I going to do? Call 911 and say, "Send an ambulance," because something happened. And while you're at it, send a fire truck just in case. Someone was going to die, and it was going to be my fault for not knowing that code. Not finding the sheet, and not having the guts to ask what a code 42 was. And then I found it. Scanned down to the bottom. 42 was the biggest number I've ever heard. Dunkin' Donuts run. Motherfuckers. I'm a firefighter in a large city in the south. We get a call at 3 AM for a structure fire. We get there and the police are already on scene, basically interrogating a guy who had no place being there. Again, it's 3 in the morning. We put the fire out after a long struggle with getting it under control and go back to the investigators to find out what happened. The rescue crew had dragged somebody out of the bathtub who was DOA. Upon further investigation, he had had gasoline poured over him in bed, and a trail of it had been left all the way out the front door. There was a brand new gas can sitting in the backyard, empty and tipped over. The guy was burnt to a crisp in the bathtub. The fire had put up such a fight because of the burning gas-soaked carpets and sheets. Here's the kicker. The fire investigation found it to be a fire caused by a space heater. This fire happened in late July, in the south. There was a space heater in the bedroom, but not plugged in. I had never seen or even heard of such a failed investigation. in my life. I was a paramedic for just shy of 10 years. One night shift around 4 a.m, we were parked in the ambulance bay at downtown hospital after transporting a patient to emergency. My partner and I were sitting in the front of the ambulance while I was finishing up my paperwork. It's important to note that we were issued ballistic vests, but it wasn't mandatory to wear them. Lots of medics don't where I worked, and I had stopped wearing them a couple of years earlier as they are super uncomfortable, and I don't have kids or a wife, so I thought screw it, comfort over getting shot. It's that point in the night shift where you're in a partial daze and just trying to get through to the finish line. All of a sudden, we hear screeching tires behind us, and a few moments later, someone is screaming, and I hear, "They just shot him in the head." Context and hindsight are everything in this story. I literally had no idea what was happening. All I knew was 1. Gun, 2. Somebody had been shot, 3. I had no idea where the shooter is. The first thing that jumped into my mind was an active shooter going nuts in the hospital. The second thought that jumped into my mind, damn, I wish I was wearing my vest. My partner and I give each other a look, and we hop out to go check it out. I didn't think much of it at the time, but in retrospect, it's probably the bravest thing I've ever done in my life. In my head, there was possibly an active shooter. Gunplay had definitely occurred. And instead of piecing the hell out, my partner and I decide to go towards the commotion so that we could help in whatever way we could. I didn't see it like that at the time. It just felt like our job. And it wasn't really a decision. But damn, younger me had some brass balls even if he didn't think so at the time. I'm older now, and if I were ever in a situation like that now, if I chose to approach, it would be way more cautiously than just blindly heading towards the unknown. Thankfully, there was no active shooter in the ambulance bay outside of emergency that we could tell of. But someone had been shot in the head. Their friends had driven them to emergency in the back middle seat of an SUV. There was probably 5 people there. It was super sketchy because you don't know who shot who, or if there's going to be more violence. You don't know who is a good guy or a bad guy, and there were no police nearby or anyone that could secure the scene. About 10 minutes later, when the police did show up, it was the SWAT guys, and they were heavily armed and everywhere. We took a cursory glance inside the SUV, and my partner went to get a stretcher and tell the nurses that there was a critical patient just outside. Inside the poorly lit SUV, there was a 30-ish-year-old male sitting in the middle of it, and under his right eye, there was a dime-sized gunshot wound. The textbook extrication of a patient with a traumatic central nervous system injury is to maintain C-spine and place them on a spine board while keeping the neck neutral. The way I extricated him was a little bit different. His face was pale blue, and he was having agonal respirations, a reflex when you're in the last moments of dying. My friend showed up with a stretcher, and realizing that the guy was most likely in cardiac arrest, I thought screw it, and climbed in, bear hugged the guy from behind, and pulled him out of the SUV and fell backwards onto the stretcher, with him on top of me. I squirmed out from under him. Nurses were there at this point. They start doing CPR, and I push the stretcher while we head in towards the trauma room. My adrenaline was pumping high. I was wide awake now. I watch as the ER team starts doing their thing. And when they roll him, that's when I see it. That dime-sized entry wound became a grapefruit-sized exit wound on the back of his head. And then I look down. I'm absolutely covered in blood. I lived downtown not too far off, and I called my supervisor, and told him I wanted to go home and have a shower and change, and he was on my case for not having an extra uniform at our station, about the same distance from the ER to my apartment. In my head, I was like, screw this place. I've seen some things in EMS, but that was probably the most oh crap moment that I can remember. It was 30 years ago, and I'm on jury duty. The charge is arson. Supposedly, a farmer burned down his barn for insurance money. The prosecutor outlines the case, where the farmer moved most of the stuff out of the barn into a second barn over a period of a week. A neighbor in a subdivision that backed up to the farm noticed the unusual activity. The said neighbor was outdoors a lot, building a deck on his vacation. Next, the neighbor saw the farmer walking slowly around the outside of the barn, pouring something from a blue gas can onto the lower part of the barn walls. The farmer goes out of sight to the front of the barn, and flames erupt all along the base of the barn. The neighbor calls 911, but by the time the fire department arrives, 5 minutes or so later, the barn is fully engulfed and they just act to contain, which is essentially just standing by, as they note the nearby ground has been closely mowed, possibly to prevent spread. They note the smell of diesel fuel, and the police collect the farmer and take him to the station. The fire investigator says definitely arson. The insurance company says the barn was insured. The defendant's lawyer says essentially nothing, so the prosecutor calls witnesses. The neighbor confirms that's what he saw. The firemen say the flame spread with rapidity that was out of place even in a wooden barn, and that they smelled petroleum. The investigator says that there were clear marks on the ground where the accelerant burned, and it still smelled of fuel after the fire died down. The police and fire investigators said that there was virtually nothing in the burned barn, no ruined tools or equipment. But there was a good supply of items in the other barn that appeared to have been recently placed, including some that was sitting on the grass that was still green underneath the box. No cross-examination. So the defense calls the farmer, and the first question asked is, let's cut to the chase. Did you burn your barn down? Yep. Why did you do it? It was old and rotten, with termites. Going to fall down. Not safe. Have you always burned down old farm buildings? Yep. And my daddy did before me. It's a farm. Are you aware that you need a permit to burn debris in this country? We've always done it that way on this farm. Never had a permit. The fine is up to $50. Oh, wait, I forgot. You're zoned active agriculture and are exempt, so no permit needed. But why did you tell any of this to the police? They didn't ask until after they put the handcuffs on me and took me to the police station. They told me anything I said would be used against me, and I said I had the right to remain silent, and then some lawyer guy came in and told me I was going to prison for insurance fraud. I remember Perry Mason said don't talk to anyone but your lawyer, so I didn't. Did you file an insurance claim? What for? The barn wasn't worth anything in that state, and I moved all the stuff out. I suggested we try and talk them out of this. You said you wanted your day in court. What's up with that? They came on my land, arrested me without telling me what for, told me later it was for arson and insurance fraud, and put that in the papers. All my friends, relatives, and neighbors know about this. They made me look dishonest. I want to make sure everyone knows the real facts. I figure this is better than them just dropping it, and everyone wondering whether they just decided not to send an old man to prison. Defense rests. This is my most amusing story from being a paramedic. We got called out to a house in Fremont for a man having a seizure. We were right down the street, so we were there first on scene within a minute. As we pull up, we see a little old lady nervously pointing to a man on her front lawn. The guy is disheveled looking, face down on the ground, with his pants around his ankles. He's moving up and down in a rhythmic fashion. It took a little bit of time, but after a few moments, we figure out the man is making sweet love to a gopher hole in the lady's lawn. About that time, Fremont PD show up, grabbed the guy, and threw him in the back of the squad car, fully aroused. The old lady was confused. I think she sort of knew what happened, but didn't want to admit it. The gopher was not available for comment. We were dispatched to a small house fire. When we arrived on scene, this fire was anything but small. 2-story home with attic, basement, and garage, fully involved. There were 4 engines, 2 ladders, 2 battalion chiefs, 1 heavy rescue, and my ambulance. Of course, there were cops everywhere around the scene. We start talking to neighbors, trying to find out more so we can tell the battalion chiefs. It turns out that this was the 3rd home in the past 2 years that this guy had owned that burnt down. Apparently, he was in a legal dispute with the company who he bought the house from, because he wasn't paying. No one knew where he was. Everyone said something different. We heard that he was out of town, had just run to the store, at the neighbors, and in the house. This was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not many of those stories made sense. It turns out the guy was out of town, came back home, set the house on fire with matches and many phone books in the basement, then went to the neighbor's house as if everything was normal. Still not sure what happened to him, but I know that I'd love to sit down with him and figure out why. We were on a call when we came to an overturned vehicle with a drunk woman hanging out the driver's side window, unconscious. She had hit a ton of stuff on that street before going over. She was not looking good. We got her all extricated and packaged and in the ambulance. I went back to the car one more time. I don't even remember why, but I looked in and noticed the empty child seat. I called to the fire captain, and suddenly the 10 firefighters, 8 cops, and 4 paramedics on scene all stopped and looked like, oh crap, how did we miss that? She wasn't awake to tell us what happened. We tore apart the car and the bushes on the roadside for 50 feet before a cop was able to get in touch with the babysitter that had the kid. That one was a big scare. I'm a police officer in Florida. One night, early morning, we get a call about a strange sound in a neighborhood. A loud, disturbing sound. I arrive in the area and hear a thump whoosh sound. It sounded like a very loud heartbeat for a gigantic heart because the sound was everywhere. I tried to figure out which direction the sound was coming from, but I seemed to be immersed in the middle of the sound. After a few moments of listening, I figure out that the sound was coming from underground. A giant heartbeat from underground. There was definitely some type of pump pushing something liquid, as I could now hear a liquid gurgle with the thump whoosh sound. My imagination is getting to me. I'm picturing a giant creature about to hatch from the egg of the earth, like a dragon was about to emerge. We get a couple more calls about the sound, so I go to another location, and now the sound is more distinct. I'm hearing a metallic slamming noise, followed by a surge of liquid and a gurgling return. The liquid is being pushed away from something and surging back. Slam, whoosh, gurgle. slam, whoosh, gurgle. Okay, not as much of an organic heart sound anymore. No hatching dragon, but still, what the heck is going on? I start following the metallic slamming sound, and I'm led to a sewer pump station. In Florida, we have a very high water table and not much depth to work with, so our sewers drain into a cistern. The contents of the cistern is then pumped back up to flow to the next stage. This is something that normally only the sewer techs are aware of, but tonight the pump had broken down. The piston was slamming down, thump, causing the water in the sewer lines to surge away from the pump, whoosh. Then the water would flow back towards the pump again, gurgle. Time to wake up the on-call water reclamation facility technician. Mystery solved. But for a few moments, I experienced the strange sensation of standing on top of a gigantic heart at 0 dark 30 hours in an otherwise quiet and perfectly normal neighborhood. I'm a dispatcher, and one call I had was from a woman who found her fiancé passed out, not breathing, having some sort of overdose of drugs or alcohol. I start running through the pre-CPR instructions and determine he's not breathing. I start instructing her with CPR, and she starts doing it. She's a good listener through this tragic situation and does everything I say. The ambulance arrives and takes over, and shortly after the fire chief gets on scene. I overheard the open cell phone line that the CPR brought him back and they were getting ready to load him up. The rush that you get after hearing that is unbelievable, and it just brings an emotion over you that you're not used to feeling. Another call I took was from a frantic woman. Her infant daughter had stopped breathing and was choking on formula. She was in such a panic at first, just screaming at me to get her someone. It took some stern words over the phone, but eventually she snapped back and I was able to walk her through some infant back thrusts, and we were able to dislodge whatever it was she was choking on. The cries of that baby were so beautiful. But one of my most proud moments was when I helped deliver a baby over the phone. I took a call from a man who said his wife was in labor, that she had called him and he just got there. She was on the floor of their living room, and I had asked him to gather a few things in case anything progresses, like I always do for an in-labor call. It's a very common type of call, but almost never does someone deliver on scene. I ask him if the waters had broken, and he asks her and gets a yes. I ask how far apart the contractions are, and get a reply in seconds. Uh-oh. I tell him to check to see if there's anything showing, and he says, yeah, I can see the top of the head. I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, my adrenaline is pumping, and I start to feel my body getting a rush of it. I tell him to position his hands, as her next contraction, she needs to give a push, and the baby's head is going to come out. Then the next contraction, the entire child is delivered. Within 15 seconds, I hear him saying, "It's a girl, it's a girl." I'm concerned with the placement of the umbilical cord, and I'm asking him, but he's too shell-shocked at the fact that he is holding his child, that he isn't responding to me. Finally, I get his response, but just then I hear the baby start to cry and the EMS personnel walking into the house. That moment will stick with me forever. It's not often that we get a call and can help out and get some good out of it, but man, when we do, it's a great feeling. A few of us on shift stopped up and visited the hospital afterwards and met the family and baby. It was a bunch of good feels for the rest of the week.